Jake Nathan is a multiple-time slam-winning spoken word poet and artist from East London. He is the current Genesis Slam Grand Champion and Kent Poetry Champion. He headlines poetry shows across London, Kent, and Essex, and he recently won the award for Nicest Man on the Internet. Very nice. From Process Productions. Jake's spoken word Bear Necessities EP is available on most streaming platforms. He has featured at the Faversham Literary Festival, Essex Writers House Festival, Margate Bookie Festival, and the Medway River Lit Festival. His poems have been featured on BBC Radio multiple times, as well as the Dead Darlings podcast and other podcasts. His page poetry has been published by Anti-Heroin Chic, Thanet Writers, and elsewhere. Well, that is a fabulous bio. I have never won a slam, and I got into this mentality where I was like, oh, it's impossible to win a slam. Just because, like, I haven't, obviously, it's just something that has eluded me. What do you think it's been about your poems that have made them so successful at slams, and what tips do you have?
I think that my poetry is better performed and seen.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's such a thing as a slam poet. I wouldn't call myself a slam poet, but I think that my style does lend itself to slams.
Yeah.
I write about like quite political things and stuff like that, which is also good for a slam to make people feel something, like having a strong opinion. But yeah, for a long time, I came second in slams for about 3 years before, 3 or 4 years before I won one. And it like got to the point where I was like a bit downhearted about it.
Yeah.
But I think the best advice I can give is don't really worry about winning for slams. It's just like go up and be yourself. Treat it like an open mic. You just get into a poem. Because I got to a point where I was so in my head about it all that I wanted to quit. And then on the way to the Genesis Grand Slam final, actually, I had like a moment of realization in the car of, oh, I don't have to care. I can just go and do poetry, and I don't have to worry about winning or not, and it doesn't matter. And since then, it's been a lot easier. And I won that night just doing the poems that I wanted to do and not worrying about winning. So I think that's the best advice. Do the poetry you want to do. Don't worry about it. Judges are so like, especially when it's so hit and miss anyway.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It is just the taking part and the seeing your friends and just seeing what other people are writing, enjoying their poems and stuff. I went through a phase of enjoying coming last. So I was like, yeah, I came last again. But you know, it's just good fun, isn't it? When did you start writing poetry and why?
I started writing poetry about 8 to 10 years ago. I always loved rap music, and wanted to be a rapper and would write raps, but I'm not really like the rap that I like. I'm not really that person. Like I'm not that character. Nobody wants to hear me rap like that.
Bless you.
So I never really, but I was Googling, no, searching YouTube for Common videos, Common's a rapper, and came across his performance at the Deaf Poetry, watched that and really enjoyed it. And I was like, oh, let me watch more of this, and then watch like actual poets doing it, and then thought, oh, this is really cool. This could be like a way for me to write and have an outlet that doesn't involve me being someone I'm not. So I started dabbling with it then. Wrote for a few years before I ever performed. I first performed like 4 and a bit years ago. So I was writing for a long time before I ever performed. I was far too nervous. I was sure I was going to turn up at poetry nights and people just could say, you're rapping, go away. But yeah, so it took me a while to perform after I started writing.
Okay. For you, is there a difference between conventional poetry and slam, and is it an important distinction, do you think?
I don't think, I mean, there are people who will write poems in a certain style for a slam, but I think that people. I don't think that's poetry. I think that I think poetry is poetry. I think there's a difference between page poetry and spoken word poetry. Not that one can't be the other, just different in styles. There are things that you can do on a page that aren't going to come across when you perform it, and the other way around as well. There's things that where you perform a certain bit a certain way that's not going to come across on the page. So I think that there's a little bit of difference there, but I think it's all poetry in the end. It's just styles of writing.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think people get stressed out about it sometimes. That it's just like, but why? We're all here. We're alive. We're sharing our work. Why be upset? Do you ever worry about people recognizing themselves in your poems? Because I do. Because I do. Yeah.
I think I don't write about certain things
Mm.
because I don't want people to get upset with me.
Yeah.
But that's something I'm trying to get over because there are things that I really like to write about where someone might get upset that I've written about it, but I think that that's like I'm allowed to express myself about
Mm.
a subject and something that's happened to me, and I think it's a people-pleasing element of my life that
Mm.
means I don't want to do it because I get really anxious about people being annoyed with me, but that's something I'm trying to. Well, I'm doing pretty well at like moving away from it, and yeah, so I definitely do avoid writing about certain people because I'd be worried about them hearing it. But I am going to try and change that. I think I'm going to write some stuff soon that might upset someone, but hopefully will not.
Yeah. I said in the last episode to someone else, like, it can be quite brutal to have the power of the last word. And I think sometimes we get that as poets. How did you feel when you won the Genesis Slam? Did you think you were going to win? Was it like a big shock? Was it a hard come down?
So, like I said earlier, leading up to that, I was having a massive anxiety attack about it
Mm.
in the Hammer and Tongue Hackney final a couple of months before, and there was just something about that night that really I didn't enjoy, and it wasn't the people, it wasn't anything to do with like Hammer and Tongue. It was just I don't know something in the environment that I didn't like,
Yeah.
and it made me really not want to do poetry for a little while. Um, so going up to Genesis, I was really, really nervous and anxious about it to the point
Mm.
where I almost cancelled. Um, I was actually talking to a mutual friend of ours, David Dykes. He said, "How are you feeling about it?" And I was like, "Mate, to be honest with you, I think I'm going to cancel. Like, I just feel too anxious about it." And he said, "Oh, I bought a ticket to come down to see you perform." So I was like, "Oh man, now I've got to perform. Like, David's coming down from Kent to watch me."
Oh.
So I like came to the resolution in my mind. I'm just going to go do my first poem, not worry about getting through, and that'll be fine. I'll do a poem that won't get me through. I'll sit down and watch the show and it'll be fine. And at least I've gone and done what I'm supposed to do. Um, and honestly, for a week before, I was so anxious, like strokes, having bad sleep, all sorts of stuff. And then on the drive there, I was getting a little bit early to meet my friend who's coming to watch me for the first time.
Mm.
And just about 10 minutes before I arrived, just had that moment of realization of you don't have to worry. You don't have to like panic about it. You can
Mm.
literally your plan is fine because you can just pick a poem that you want to do, and if you get through, you get through, and if you don't, you don't, and it doesn't matter. It's just poetry. But like for some reason, that hadn't computed in my brain before. But it's just one of those like, what's the word? But just like a flash, and then sort of it like spread through my body of just like, oh, okay, I've got that now. So on the night, it was a weird night. I like from that point on, I felt okay about it. And got up and did the poems that I wanted to do. And it was like, got just pleasantly surprised when I got through each round. Like, oh, okay, what one should I do next? And when I got into the final, I was sitting there thinking, like, what one should I do? What one will win it for me? And then I thought, no, that's not what we're doing here. The last two rounds, you've just done the poem that you wanted to perform at the time. So just do whatever one you want to do. I ended up reading the poem in the last round that I didn't know off by heart, which in like slam culture is it's not the best idea to do, but I did it and I won. And then afterwards, I didn't really feel anything. I was just a bit like, oof, that's over.
Mm.
What happened? What happens next? And it took me a little while to sort of get my head around it. And then sitting at home, I sort of realized, oh, I've like when I started poetry a few years ago, if you'd have told me I got to this point, he would have said, "Oh my God, that's amazing! Like I can't believe we've done that." And then I sort of sat with that and realized, yeah, no, that's really cool. But I think I'm like I need to reevaluate my goals because I've achieved everything that Jake, who hadn't never performed before,
Yeah.
would have thought was incredible. So like I sort of realized I was in a time of transition and was like, okay, it's time to start like phase two. Like how do I want to take this further? I've sort of
Yeah.
established myself as being a good poet, but how do I want to take that further now? How do I want to establish myself? How do I want to like what sort of legacy, I guess, do I want to have as
Mm.
a poet? So
Yeah, that's so true. I think, I'm at the same point in many ways. I see, for such a long time I was on the grind of poetry and I did all the things that I wanted to do. And now I see so many new people on the same grind. But then sometimes I think, but what's it for? But I know it's a luxury to be at the end of it and then look back and think, oh, hang on a second, what's it for? Because if I wasn't there, I'd still be putting the work in. But I think for me, it's just like still make authentic work. And I don't know, sometimes I feel like we try and write truthfully, or at least we try to write our own truth. And when you see truth being manipulated in the
mhm.
news or politically or, by political parties, you kind of think, is this what's going to happen to my truth and my words and stuff? And it kind of sours it a bit. So yeah, I'm with you on the reevaluation.
Yeah, I just sort of feel like that like I was in the let me prove that I'm worthy of being on a stage mode.
Hmm.
And now I'm like, no, I've proved that. Now, what do I want to create? What do I want my poetry to be? So,
Hmm.
I put a DYCP application in, develop your creative practice with the Arts Council because and just said I want to explore three different avenues.
Hmm.
I want to write something and put it out, a pamphlet, I think it's going to be. I want to try and develop like a show, either a two-person show. I was going to be developing a two-person show, but and the person I was doing it with has got a lot going on in life at the moment, so it might end up being a one-person show. And then to explore with music as well and use my writing
Hmm.
to write songs because I've been learning to make music for the last few years. Um, yeah, and it's just like to treat myself as a poet now rather than someone trying to be a poet and to
Yeah.
try and make art in the make. So I look at someone like you who's been doing it longer. You've been published by Bad Betty. You've done all these things. You are like at the next level that I want to get to. I want to be like I want to feel like I'm a poet. Or I look at
Yeah.
you and like you're a poet to me. That's what I want to
Oh,
make.
I've never won a slam, and I can't get into Anti-Heroin Chic either. So I think I'd like to get into that magazine because it's very, very good. But that Bad Betty thing makes me look great, but it was just luck. I just managed to get in through the door when they were first starting. So I think a lot of the times these things are luck and just by the grace of whoever wants to believe in us at the time. So yeah, not that don't know how much credit I can take with that one. Um
I think you can take a lot of credit for that. I don't think Jake and Amy
oh,
published.
I'll take it. Yeah, I'll take it. What advice would you give to poets starting out now?
Um, to just do it, just go and do it as much as possible. If you're a page poet, sit down and just write everything, enjoy it. If you want to be a spoken word, get on stage poet, do that as well, and just write and experience poetry, and and the more you take in, the better you're going to get. Seeing
Hmm.
other poets, it never makes sense to me when someone says, "Oh, I don't want to read poetry because I don't want to be influenced by others. I want my work to be my
Oh
work." It's
yeah,
like, no,
that's mental. Yeah. Yeah.
don't see as much as you can. Take bits from everyone that you like and do it in your own way. Don't copy anyone. But like, no, nothing's original at this point. Really, just look, go and watch someone perform, take what you like about them and put it into your work, whatever it may be. Like, I remember watching David Dykes and just thinking, I would love to be able to write that delicately. I want to be able to write, to describe something in the way that he does it. But I don't want to be David Dykes. I just want to have that element of it. Or you see Tommy Carver Chaplin, the first time I saw him perform, and he was so honest and about emotions and stuff like that, and think, oh yeah, I want to write that honestly. I want to tell people like about my life in a really open, brutally honest way. And if I had just carried on writing in my bedroom, I wouldn't have developed the skills that I've got now. Because you go and you see different people and they inspire you to do different things. The first time that you saw Henry Madicott perform and you're like, oh, I want that stage presence. I want that performance. Yeah, I think it's important to see poetry, read poetry. And I don't read massive amounts of poetry because like my preference for poetry is seeing it performed. So I like to get out and see that. And I read a bit, but I often feel a bit like a fake. But then I remind myself, no, you are a spoken word poet. That's how you like. That's what I see myself as. So going out to see poetry performed is the way that I sort of take it in and learn from it. So I think just don't do what you feel, do what you love, and
Yeah.
keep enjoying it because that's the main bit.
I did my master's with David Dykes, and he was like that day one. Like he came in with that stuff like day one, he was writing like that, and everyone was like, oh my God, like what is that with this guy? But yeah, he's an amazing writer. Can you tell me a bit about your EP, Bare Necessities?
So it's my second EP. I put my first one out very early on, and I just went on YouTube. But this EP was like I have not done anything for a while, and I put out a product. And I wanted to put something out. Just felt like I should do something. And I was thinking about it and was like, well, I've got a lot of poems that I wrote to a theme for a slam.
Yeah.
That are not necessarily going to end up in other places.
Yeah.
Maybe I should put those out. So I thought, yeah, that's a good idea. I'll do that. So each track on the EP is it's not the name of the poem. It's the theme that I wrote to for the slam, and they weren't all slams. Some of it was just like a new writing event. Like here's a theme for the night. Write something like this. Yeah, so it's all stuff that I've written to a theme, and it ended up being called the Bear Necessities EP because I designed the cover before I had the name, and I put a bear on it as I've got something with bears. I really like bears. I feel an affinity with them. On my first EP cover, I was wearing a bear mask, and in this EP cover is illustrated, and I put a bear on there. And I was talking to my friend M Hunter, he's also a poet, and saying I don't know what to call it yet. And she's like, so you were writing to a theme for all of these? Like, yeah. So it's like you had to write to that theme. Yeah. So it was a necessity for you to write to that theme. It's like, yeah. So and you've got a bear there. I was like, oh yeah, okay, cool. That can be that. So
Yeah,
that's how I
that's
got its name. So yeah, it was just wanting to feeling like it'd been a long time since I put something out that showed my abilities and that I was better than I was last time I'd done that, and just wanting to have something out there that that represented me. So it wasn't a big thing. I recorded it myself and put it out, and
yeah.
yeah, it's cool. I only started performing because after I had Eddie, my first son. I talked about performing for a while, but like half-heartedly. And I've got a poem about this as well, but I thought how like when he grows up and he tells me what his dreams are, how can I tell him to go after them if I never did what I was passionate about? So I like he's the reason that I got up and started performing. And now I have George too, so I've got two sons, and I feel like I'm doing all of this for them. If it was for me, I probably wouldn't be bothering. But I want to have something for them to be proud of, I guess, or just have. I'm sort of only doing it to be like, okay, what do you want to do? Look, I went after it. Like, we need to find what you're passionate about as well, because there's so like life is so pointless, and if you don't find something that you're passionate about and something that engages you. So it's like it has affected me as a writer, but it's also the only reason I'm doing all of this is to like show them that you can. Um, and it has definitely affected the way I write and the things that I write about. The last couple of years, I've been writing so much about what it is to be raised as a working class boy in England, and like things that you're taught, the things that you learn, and then have to unlearn if you're going to be a decent person. Like, you're so many toxic things. Writing about misogyny and patriarchy and sexism and all these things, and I think like I've really been writing about the faults and the way that we bring up boys, and the um the problems with what we teach men in as a society, and what men understand and don't understand and choose to ignore. And there's so little like recognizing of privilege, of male privilege, and it's all treated as a big joke, and like, you know, like laddie culture. So I definitely, I don't know if I would be writing about that if I wasn't raising two boys. I think probably um that's definitely something that's on my mind a lot, and how do I raise these boys to be good men and not affected by the stuff that I believed and had to unlearn in order to be a decent person. Because you get taught so many strange and damaging things as a boy. You get taught a level of entitlement that is completely uncomfortable and should not be. And it's difficult because like when Eddie's 6 now, so he started school a couple of years ago, and me and his mum, we aren't together, but we're really good friends. We co-parent, but we raised him to nothing was a boys thing or a girls thing. That wasn't a thing. It was whatever he wanted to do was fine. His favorite color was pink. Right up until he started school, it was always pink. And then he started school within a couple of weeks. It's like, oh no, pink's not my favorite color anymore. That's a girl's color. And it's like, no, it's just a color. Like, daddy wears pink. What's problem? What's the problem? And like, no, that's the girls. And he started getting these girls and boys ideas, and it's like, oh, like you get to you've been like raising them exactly how you want them to that point, and then you're like, no, and here comes society. So it's like trying to teach them different things. I had long hair until like the beginning of this year, but he would say things like, "Oh, girls have long hair," and I'd be like, "Well, Daddy's got long hair. What are you talking about? Am I a girl?" I'm like, no, I'm just challenging on these ideas.
Yeah.
And but you've got to challenge them on the small ones, because like the big ones build up. So the foundation needs to be an understanding of like society doesn't always tell you the truth. It tells you things that it says are the truth, but they're not true things. So for sure, like being a parent has affected the way that I write and the things that I think about, in a really good way, I think.
I remember I had a very proud moment when my son came up to me and said, "Mummy, Mummy, I wore skirt at protest." And I was like, "Yay!" So, yeah, good on you, son.
My youngest
Um,
boy, he's the laddiest little lad. Like, just naturally, he's like physical and loves rubbing down, but he loves wearing a dress. He wears dresses all the time. He's just going to superheroes, so he started dressing as superheroes rather than dresses. But like he was Anna and Elsa from Frozen.
Oh yeah, they love that. That's classic. Yeah.
He wore a tutu for like 6 months every day just because he loved it. And he'll often say to me, "Daddy, I'm half boy and half girl." And I'm like, "Yeah, cool. You're what you want to be, mate. Because like you're literally that. You're literally half me and half your mum. But if like whatever you want to be is whatever you want to be."
Yeah.
It's important to like let boys know that they can be whatever they want. They've not got to be what they're told, because that is what is most of the problem with manhood.
Definitely. Who are some of your favorite poets? They can be like, famous or local, whatever you. whatever you identify as your favorite poets.
Um, so the people that inspired me in poetry, when I first heard George the Poet, I thought, oh wow, like this is someone who's from where I'm from, like writing about stuff that happens where we're from. Um, and I found him a massive inspiration. I met him, I went to watch the Roundhouse Slam, not this year, last year, or maybe it was the year before even, and he was performing there, and I went up to him and said, like, I just want you to know that I started spoken word poetry a lot in a big way because of you and the way that you spoke and the way that you perform. And I think I take it probably like the conversational element of my style is probably from him because it just felt like he was talking to me, even though he's doing poetry. The deaf poetry is a huge influence on me. And there's a guy called Mums the Schemer, our styles aren't really alike, but I really just loved the way that he performed, and he seemed to be completely himself and not worrying at all about what people were thinking about him. And he definitely had like rap elements to his style, which was where I was coming from as well. And I really loved him. And then people that I'm around as well, I find very inspirational. I've become really fortunate to become friends with Tyrone Lewis, and I think Tyrone is amazing. Who else? M Hunter, I talked about earlier. We first connected on Instagram, and she's like a mask lesbian, and she was talking about like things to do with being a mask lesbian, and I just remember thinking like it's not something you hear about a lot. Like I feel like you're a really important voice in talking about like telling those stories. They need to be told as well. Hazel Mehmet, I love as well. Like, but yeah, like people that I'm very fortunate to be friends with, but I find them like just it's his brutal honesty, like delivered on the nose. Like here's exactly what I'm telling you. I love that about them. Yeah, there's so many people. That's why I say get out and watch poetry, because what I thought was poetry when I started doing poetry was so small compared to what there is. And there are so many people that I've seen that inspire me, and yeah, I'm struggling to even like narrow down
And I think it's
people.
nice that you pick people that you know or people that you've watched rather than like Shakespeare or something, which would have been a nice answer, but I think a more relevant answer is what you said.
Yeah, like I studied like poetry at school. You don't really, it's page poetry that's in this anthology. It's like I liked it at the time. It's not that I don't like that stuff, but it didn't inspire me to go and be a poet. It was later on finding stuff. Like I remember like Benjamin Zephaniah.
Oh, he's
He lived he lived in my area. He lived in East Ham, which is where I grew up. And I'm sure he came into our school once. And I remember if he didn't come into school, we watched videos of him or something. But I remember watching him before and being like, this is different to the poetry that we're reading. And like I studied the Romantics at university and all that stuff, and I like it all. I like language, but it wasn't until I started seeing people on stage performing it that I really got poetry. And I think like when you talk about Shakespeare, people always say like it'd been boggled by the idea that people don't perform poetry. Like he was writing it to be performed. Um, but yeah, it just wasn't the classic writers that inspired me to perform. I liked it and I enjoyed it and I could appreciate a poem, but that wasn't the work that made me want to get up and do stuff. It was seeing it on stage performed by people.
I feel like with Benjamin Zephaniah now and some other sort of black icons like James Baldwin and other people as well, the kind of the post writing machine appreciation train kind of ends up whitewashing and or diluting a lot of the politics that they stood for. And it's just like,
Yeah.
he's not your kind of postcard guy. He's actually, these were his ideas. So I think that's a bit, not so great.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like when you listen to James Baldwin, I love watching James Baldwin interviews
Oh,
because you
yeah.
can he's in the moment and just think like off the top of his head, giving these incredibly beautiful answers, but that are such like he's such a radical compared to like what society expected of him or wanted
Yeah.
him to be. And you sort of you see him get like shown, oh, James Baldwin, what a great, but people don't really delve into like how at the time he would have been like considered so subversive. Like
Mm.
he's preaching things that society does not want you to hear. And sort of in his death, he's been like, "Oh, look at this! We've got a picture of James Baldwin."
Yeah,
But
they
like,
reel him out, the middle class, like, and here's, what is your, if you have sort of one, what is your writing process? Once you're hit with an idea, where do you take it from there?
so if I get an idea for something, I'll write it down on my phone. I'm a very new age writer, I guess. But like, I'll make a note of it on my phone. And
Mm.
I will sit with it and see what ideas come to me. I think a lot of my writing process is opening myself up to like the creative universe and sort of
Mm.
letting it flow through me. I'm a big believer in like opening yourself up to ideas and keeping an open mind and letting them come in, because often things will turn up like I just get an opening line pop into my head fully formed. I've not built it word by word. It just comes into my head and I'm like, yeah, that's it. And like once I have that first bit, then the poem will flow and start to build. And like sometimes I have the idea and it comes straight away and I just write it then and there. But other times it'll sit in my phone for 6 months and then one day I'll just be like just sitting thinking. I think it's like sitting and thinking is an important part of it.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, and I'll get an idea that sort of unlocks it, and like the first one comes through, and then everything follows it. So I think that it's definitely like just sitting and thinking, having the time, not not putting pressure on myself to get it out, doing it when it feels right. I know that people say like you should be writing on time to get the practice, and I think that I do that, but I don't pressurize the idea. I think I've got loads of started poems that I was inspired to write a bit of, and it didn't. The rest of it didn't come, and it might come later on. So I am writing all the time, but I'm not putting pressure on anything. It's just what comes and what feels right. Um, and then I don't really worry about. I sort of edit as I go, but then it's about how it feels in my mouth when I'm reading it out. So I like to read it out to myself and record myself. And then that's often where I find the bits that are too clunky, that I don't like how it sounds, if the flow doesn't work. And my editing will be a lot about how it feels when I say it rather than how it looks on a page or just like thinking that's the perfect word there or whatever. I let it come to me, and then I through not necessarily performing but reading it to myself will decide what I want to keep and what stays, and oh, that needs an extra bit or stuff like
Mm.
that. I try and do it as intuitively as possible.
Mm. I love that when you get that first line. That just feels so beautiful, doesn't it? It's just like,
Yeah.
like the light bulb.
And sometimes that's all you have for months, but it's just
Yeah,
sitting there
true,
waiting for
yeah.
it, and and the next bit will come, and you're like, okay, and you write like nearly a whole poem, and then you get
Mm.
another 2 weeks or whatever of not being able to write anything. Yes, I think it's all about letting the process happen, not pushing it. Is a big part of my writing.
Mm, definitely. Do you think nowadays it's actually important to write a collection? Because I see so many people like yourself, like Hares, like, Henry Medical, diversifying and doing different things, whether it's music, recording, theatre, whatever, slams, and everyone seems so successful and in their element. And I think, is it almost becoming outdated, this traditional thing of having, this book that you try and flog because, people seem to be doing fine without it?
Yeah, I've struggled with the idea of do I want to write something or not, because I think my poetry is best experienced performed by me. because so much of my writing is in the emphasis that I put in different bits and things like that. But I also think that like when you put something out in the world, it ceases to be yours as well. So I like the idea of putting out my writing. And I'm thinking with like I'm talking about the pamphlet that I want to write, I'm thinking about putting like a link in it, like a QR code or something where people can scan, they can go and listen to me read it as well. But I also like the idea that people are going to take it and it's going to be theirs. They're going to read it, and the way that they experience it is just for them. So I've definitely like gone back and forth in my head about like, am I the sort of poet that needs to write a collection? But I think I would like to have stuff out there. And I don't know if that's me just holding on to old ideas or whatever it is, but that's not the only thing that I want to do. I want to, in other ways, get writing out there. I want to try and do a one person show, or I had this idea about poets, sort of like 4 or 5 poets. You will get like a 20-minute set, and you tour it together. And like I think there are different ways that we need to get poetry out there, because I think that it's like for me coming from a working class background, I didn't know you could be a poet. I knew you could be a poet, but I didn't know I could be a poet. I didn't know how to get into poetry. I didn't know when I first started poetry where to go to find places to do it. I actually performed on a music open night for the first time, and I was lucky that Barry Fenton Hall was there and saw me and invited me to his night, and that's how I met poets. I think we need to like find new ways to engage the working class with poetry, because I think there are a lot of stories that need to be told from working class lives that don't get told, because it's considered a very middle upper class thing. So my idea of diversifying is like, how can I reach as many different people as possible? If I put books out, maybe they'll wait their way into a school or something. If I create a performance, maybe I can go into a school and perform for kids. Like if I make music and people hear it and then look into me and see, oh, he's a poet. I can read his stuff. And a big focus for me and a big dream of mine is to inspire working class kids to write poetry. I did some teaching in the summer for a charity, working with working class kids, and I really loved it. So that's something that I really want to do more of as well. So a big focus of mine is trying to inspire working class kids, particularly all working class kids, but also like helping boys express themselves, because I think that so much of our society tells boys not to feel things, and that's a gigantic problem in men, is that they're not expressing themselves and they're not talking about things, and they you try and be something. You're told what a man is, and you're trying to be that. And I want to teach people how to be themselves instead, because
I think one of the issues is that if you're the one to break the chain, suddenly you're alienated from maybe your father and your grandfather and maybe your brother, maybe your brothers. And if they're the only people you have in your life, who do you have left? So I think it's a frightening thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it is so much of like wanting to be what people want you to be. That's so much of manhood is living up to expectations which are not what you are, but they're what you're expected to be. But it's been happening for so long. Like when I talk to my dad and my uncle, they are they're quite manly men. They're from the East End. They're like, but they in older age are looking back and realizing, oh, I was trying to be something that I wasn't. Like it wasn't until a couple of years ago that my uncle started talking about his anxiety and my dad started talking about his depression. And like it's like we've been dealing with those things, but we couldn't talk about them. So I just want to be like, I want to get in early on to boys and just be like, look at me, I'm a man who's talking about my feelings and I'm getting praise for it. Like it's a good thing. You should be doing this too.
Yeah.
And the more we can do that, the better men will be in the end.
Yeah. And I wonder if people are allowed to leave their class, or not leave their class, but I wonder if people are actually allowed to have money.
I've been thinking about this a lot recently. It's something that didn't occur to me until like the last months of every single success gets taken away from the working class.
Hmm.
If you are start working class and you earn money, they want to take you out of it. They want to make you middle class now. There are no working class success stories because
Hmm.
it's you're a different class now.
Yeah.
And I think that we need to reframe what success is for the working class and show people that like no, there are working class success stories. It's just that they try and take that away from you because working class people are supposed to be aspirational and wanting to not be working class. You're not supposed to celebrate it. And that's something that I really want to address as well, is like the working class. There are negatives to it, and there are things that we shouldn't be celebrating, but there is a lot that should be celebrated from the working class. We're sort of told that we don't have culture when there's huge amounts of working class culture. It's just that people outside of it don't recognize it because
Hmm.
our story is being told by people who aren't us. It's middle class people, it's upper class people who are writing, who are making this art, which is the thing that lasts in life. So when we look back, it's not, you don't see the working class story, you see other people's ideas of what working classness is. And it's
Hmm.
not things that we love and that are important to us are not celebrated the way that they should be. Um, and I think that's an important thing that needs to change. I really want to. I'm going to do at Poeticon. Con has asked me to do a talk. Con Science has asked me to do a talk, and I'm going to do a talk about getting working class people creating, because that's such an important thing for me. I think that we got like working class boys from London in the '60s making rock
Hmm.
and roll, and they got
Yeah.
art. They were sort of using somebody else's art form.
Yeah.
But there are like examples of working class people doing stuff, but I don't necessarily think that it's an encouraged thing. Those people are outliers because we're in the working class, you're meant to work with you. What do you want to be? Means what job do you want and stuff like that. So it's very important to me to get the working class story or culture out there and celebrated. And there are people doing that. Jake Wild Hall, I saw him do a poem recently about being on the estate when someone gets out of prison and being excited to see him. It's like that's such a niche experience. Like people outside of that environment don't get it. And
Hmm.
like when you're working class, you know people who have been to prison and all these things, and it's such a different tale of morality because we're told it's all very black and white, but it's not. There are all these different experiences. We know people who don't necessarily work inside the system.
Hmm.
Um, and all these things, and they'll celebrate that. They'll make a film about the Krays because like they would reach like legendary status, but that it's there's so much to delve into beyond that.
Yeah.
The working class experience is so much deeper than it's given credit for, and that needs to be taught about.
Yeah, I think there's also an assault on the working class via, um, government as well. I think there's a don't you dare use
Yeah,
your
for
brain
sure.
or anything you've got. So I think it's a multiple pronged attack.
Yeah, it's systematic. We live in a system that has been designed to keep us where we are
Mm.
because they need us working for them, and
Yeah.
it's you've got to sort of break through the generations of training to
Yeah.
to.
I won't stick to this for too long, but one thing I noticed, it was insane because of how even the schools will monopolize people based on class, even at a really young age. How many people are they doing this to that we'll never know? How many people did they send down the mines? How many people did they? It's just the sheer loss of human potential is just staggering.
Yeah, this it's not. It's definitely systematic because even like when I went to school, we got three options. Everything else that you had to do, and you got your three options that you could choose to do. But no one was like grabbing hold of people. No one who like was teaching me was saying to me like, "You really enjoy language. Why don't you try and do more with that?" It was like pass your exam and that's it. Then you go and like, what job do you want to do when you leave? That's what we're aiming towards. What choose your subject based on what you're going to do when you leave. And I see people like my granddad who who definitely had like ADHD, but obviously it was like he was born in the 50s, so that sorry, not even the 50s, the 30s. So like he ended up leaving school at a young age because he was unruly. He ended up going to like kid prison, like Borstal, and but was completely self-taught in everything he did. So he taught himself how to like rewire an entire house, how to do all of his plumbing. He was a really clever man who just wasn't given the opportunities, and he would walk around quoting poetry to us all the time. I'm sure he's a big part of why I do poetry. I don't think I was taking it in consciously then, but he would constantly be quoting poetry to us and like and just all these things that he loved. But as a working class man, it was more important that he had his job and he got on with his job. So he was a docker, and then he was a black cabbie. But like his role was as you need to start a family and earn money for that family and just keep things going, but was never taught how to express himself. And I think that we need so much more of that.
Well, I think we've covered the question, do you consider yourself a working class poet? Maybe a better question would be, how do people write about politics and society? Because if you sit down and you say, I'm going to write a poem about David Cameron being a bad man, it's going to be a shit poem. So how does one have a way in?
I always try, whenever I'm writing something political, if I'm writing about a person, like you said, sitting down and writing a poem about David Cameron, I didn't write about David. I've got a poem about Nigel Farage. I did have a poem about Boris Johnson. And I would always try and bring humor into it. If you just get up and I just saying, I don't like Boris Johnson, he's done this, he's done that, it's very quickly going to get boring and not be interesting. So my poem about Boris Johnson was called "The Man with a Silly Hair Who Wanted to Be Mayor," and it was just like how he sort of got he played this oath, didn't he? Like, oh, look at me, I'm a silly posh boy, and everyone was like, oh, he's harmless, and then like, eventually he got into like the highest position you can get into and done a lot of damage, and he like. So I sort of told a story about taking the mick out of him and making it funny, but like each step of the way building on, oh, he did this, but then he did this, and people still thought it was funny, and he did this.
I like that. That's clever.
So I just think that like you can't. A lot of the stuff I write when it's like mental health and stuff like that is on the nose, and I'm saying like this is brutally honest how I feel. But when you're writing about politics and stuff, you need to have another angle because people are so burned out on it and are taught by society, oh, this is like, don't talk about that, it's tacky. But that's definitely a way that they control the narrative. Because if nobody's talking to each other about things, then we're not sharing ideas, and we're not saying, oh, you feel that way as well too. You feel that the same way they tell you not to talk about how much you get paid. Because if you all talk about how much you get paid and you realize, oh, that person's on that and that person's on that, but I'm only on this, like you can work together to like figure out what you should be earning and make sure that you're earning that. There's so much of it that societally we're told, don't think about this, just don't worry about that. They know what they're doing, let them get on with it. So you have to come in at an angle. But I do think it's very important that people write about stuff. Like I've got a poem about Grenfell, which I don't use humor in at all because it's about Grenfell, but you need to find the way to write about the different things. So like when it's something,
no one has come to justice over that. Still,
no, I did it. I performed it once, and it was when I thought I need to have new material all the time, and I thought I was really like dragging Grenfell out because it was my best poem that I'd written at that point, and I thought I was performing it too much, and I said that Jake Wildhall was there, and I said I think I'm going to stop performing this soon because I don't because I've been doing it a lot, and he came up to me afterwards and said never stop performing that, don't ever stop performing that because like it's always important to hear, and now we're what, 8 years on from it, and I still do it. I did it the other week at the Bookie Slam, and it's still relevant because people aren't changing anything. And the way that they deal with these things is they just let it drag out until people stop talking about it. So
Mhm.
that's why it's so important to talk about these things and political things, and to keep talking about it. Like it feels like with like Palestine and Gaza, they're just waiting for people to stop worrying about it. And I think like dangerously people are. You see it talked about less and less. Like yesterday I saw a lot more stories about Palestine than I had for a few weeks, and I was like, oh yeah, like we need to keep talking about this because life goes on. It's very easy to just let things slip away, and then
Yeah.
you talk about them and like they're in the past, but Grenfell is very much still a thing that should be talked about because there's still this cladding in so many of these towers that they know is flammable. They knew it was too flammable when they put it in, because in other countries it's illegal to use that cladding in buildings above 4 stories. Like they know everything about this stuff and they're doing it deliberately because it's cheaper. They'd rather risk a tower burning down and spend more money. Like these are all
Mm.
deliberate decisions. So like these things have to be talked about, but they just try and they placate people. Oh yeah, we're working until you forget about it and stop asking. So it's really
Mm.
important to keep
It's just
keep
the
talking about this
face of
stuff.
bureaucracy, isn't it? And I wonder, is it gross incompetence or is it deliberate? And these days, I try not to be conspiratorially minded because I don't know if that's helpful, but I lean more towards these things are deliberate. And it's hard for me to predict what the shape of things are going to look like in the future. I don't know what the future looks like. It'd be interesting to see.
No, there is definitely so much deliberateness in the way that they talk about things and handle things. Like when it was through listening to George the poet talk about Grenfell that I realized how much deeper it was than, oh, this is a tragic accident. No, this was a decision that was made to use this cladding which wasn't suitable but was cheaper. Like these are decisions that are being made. And like I say in the poem, like I'm not saying that you wanted these people to die, but you didn't care if they did because you used this cladding. You knew that there was a chance that these people would be more likely to die. You have this cladding, but you chose that because it saved you money. And like we have to hold people accountable for their decisions. And there's definitely we can see from all the Palestine stuff like how much of it is because of who's paying what people and who is telling people what to say. And because we can see what the truth is, we can all see what's happening. But so many people are in a position of power and are paid to say certain things that most people who just want to have an easy life, who don't delve into things. And like we're poets, so we look at every little thing. But so many people just try and get on with life because working is hard and raising a family is hard and just existing in this world is hard. So they don't bother looking beyond the surface level. And when they make the surface level a blanket, this is what it is, then people don't ever go beyond that. And that's a deliberate thing. It's a story that they're telling. And when you have bothered to look and you can see, it's devastating because you can see how much damage is going on and how
Mm.
heartbreaking it all is. But yeah, so I think I wouldn't consider myself a conspiracy theorist, but I think that like I see the deliberateness of the actions.
Mm. Yeah. What's your what's your favorite poem that you've written? What's your poem that you think, yeah, that's me at my best?
Um, it's a hard question. In terms of like the effect that it has, Grenfell is like the way that I am able to perform that now, knowing it so well, I silence rooms completely with it and like really make people think about it, which I'm
That's a
really
good
proud.
feeling when you can't hear a pin drop. You're like, I got him. I
The
got him with
first
it.
the first few times it happened, I was a bit like, oh shit, have I like what am I doing here? Have I
Mm.
like, lost it? I remember talking to people and being like, oh no, it's like everyone was listening so intently. So like that is it's like really it's hard to do get that. I think I've sort of stumbled across it. I don't know how I did it, but in terms of having an effect on a room, but in terms of like my favorite bit of writing, it's not in Grenfell. It's in other poems. I wrote a poem recently that might be my favorite that I've ever written, but it's about growing up in London and just like being a boy, being a teenager, growing up in London and going through and talking about all these things that like we all did, but then also referencing like the negatives and the things where we're competing against each other and we're all pretending and we're pointing at each other saying you're the weak ones so that nobody sees how weak we are, which I really, really like. So I think that the more I write, the better I get. And I wrote Grenfell a long time ago, and it's not necessarily the writing in that, but it's the poignancy of it. And I've really learned how to perform it as well to get the most out of it. I've really found like the gaps in it and the silences and the breaths where you just leave people thinking about something. Yeah, so it's a difficult question to answer, but probably Grenfell in terms of effectiveness.
Yeah, I like that. I always think, my favorite poem is my last poem, and I'm writing for my next poem. But yeah, I like that. Well, thank you so much for talking to me.